Welcome to a deep dive into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay.
It's clear from all these sources you've given me, the historical overviews, different perspectives on Hamas and Netanyahu, the analyses of the October 7th attack, and even reports on protests in Europe.
Yeah.
That you're looking for more than just headlines. You want to really get into the complexities, the history, the why behind it all.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating about doing this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're not just skimming the surface. We're going to unpack all these sources, uncover all the different layers of this conflict, all the way from the historical roots to its global implications.
Well, let's start with that history then, because some of these sources go back like over a century. It's amazing how events from so long ago can still have such a huge impact today.
They really do. And one document that really shows this is the Balfour Declaration of 1917.
Okay.
It might seem like some kind of relic from the past,
Right.
but it's had such a big impact on the current conflict. It's undeniable.
Okay, I'm all ears.
All right.
What was so significant about this declaration?
Well, picture this. So the Ottoman Empire had been ruling Palestine for centuries.
Right.
It's starting to weaken.
Okay.
And both Jewish and Arab populations were really starting to vie for control.
Okay.
And then the British, in the middle of World War I, saw a chance to gain favor with the Zionist movement, which was really gaining traction in Europe at the time.
So the British basically promised the Jewish people a homeland in Palestine.
Yeah, basically, but the way they wrote it was very vague, which led to decades of different interpretations and conflicting claims.
Okay.
So they pledged British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
Okay.
But they also said that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
Ah, I see the problem. Promising a homeland for one group while also vowing to protect the rights of another group already living there, that's just asking for conflict.
Exactly. In many ways, the Balfour Declaration kind of sowed the seeds for the conflict we see today.
Right.
It really fueled those tensions between the Jewish and Arab populations.
Yeah.
Created a real powder keg.
And of course, then things escalated further with the UN partition plan in 1947 and the subsequent war in 1948.
Exactly. That partition plan, which was supposed to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, was rejected by the Arab leaders. And then when Israel declared independence in 1948, that's when the war broke out.
Yeah.
And the fallout from that war, particularly the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, is something that still shapes the conflict today.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to think about the lasting effects of those historical events.
It really is.
But let's fast forward a bit and talk about some of the key players in the current conflict, especially the ones you highlighted in your sources. Hamas, for example, seems to be a particularly complex and controversial group.
They're fascinating.
Yeah.
They emerged in the late 1980s during the first Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, against the Israeli occupation.
Right.
And what makes them so interesting is they kind of play this dual role. So on one hand, they're this militant group known for their rocket attacks and tunnel warfare against Israel. But on the other hand, they also provide social services in Gaza.
So they're seen as terrorists by some, but freedom fighters by others.
Exactly.
It must make it even more difficult to understand this conflict.
It really does. And their tactics have been widely condemned, especially those indiscriminate rocket attacks that have caused civilian casualties.
Right.
But at the same time, in Gaza, where you have so much poverty and desperation, they've gained support by providing essential services that the Palestinian Authority just hasn't been able to deliver.
That's such a tough situation.
It is.
To understand how an organization can be viewed so differently, depending on the perspective,
it really is.
It makes me wonder, what are their ultimate goals?
Well, their charter actually calls for the liberation of all of historical Palestine.
Wow.
Which includes present-day Israel.
Okay.
But in recent years, there have been hints of pragmatism within Hamas, suggesting maybe a potential willingness to accept a two-state solution.
Interesting. So there's potentially some room for negotiation, even with a group that's often labeled as solely militant?
Perhaps. Yeah. But to really understand the dynamics at play, we also need to look at the other side of the equation.
Okay.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
You included some sources that really delve into his long tenure as Israel's prime minister.
Yes, he's been a dominant figure in Israeli politics for years.
Absolutely.
And his policies have certainly shaped how this conflict has played out.
They really have. You know, his right-wing stance, his focus on security and economic prosperity, and that controversial handling of Palestinian relations all play a role in this.
Yeah.
What stands out to you from those sources about his leadership?
Well, the Abraham Accords struck me as a major achievement. I mean, forging diplomatic ties with Arab states that were historically hostile to Israel?
Yeah.
That's not easy.
No, absolutely not. The Abraham Accords were a significant diplomatic victory for Netanyahu.
Yeah.
It shows that he's really able to navigate complex regional politics. But it also raises a key paradox. How could he achieve such a breakthrough?
Right.
While at the same time overseeing an escalation in the conflict with the Palestinians?
That's a really good question. It seems like 2 steps forward, 1 step back in some ways.
Precisely. And to understand that dynamic, we really need to delve into a specific event that kind of shook the region and the world, the October 7th attack.
Yes, that event was definitely a turning point. It's one thing to read about it in the news, but the sources you provided give a much more visceral, personal perspective.
They do. We get to kind of see the sheer horror of that day through these different firsthand accounts.
Yeah.
Survivor testimonies, the detailed descriptions of the attacks.
Right.
It's a real sobering reminder of what this conflict costs in terms of human life.
It sounds like the scale and brutality of those attacks were unprecedented, targeting music festivals, kibbutzim, even beach parties.
Yeah.
It seems almost deliberately designed to inflict as much terror and cause as many casualties as possible.
That's what it seems like. The sources you provided detail those horrific tactics.
Yeah.
People being shot while trying to flee, homes set on fire,
right,
and those hostages that were taken.
Yeah.
The psychological impact that had both on Israelis and the international community can't be overstated.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that this conflict is far from a distant, abstract issue. It has real devastating consequences for real people.
It does. And that's such a crucial point to keep in mind as we go forward.
Yeah.
Understanding that human dimension, the personal stories behind the headlines, is so essential to understanding the true complexity of this conflict.
Well said. I'm ready to explore more, especially the aftermath of the October 7th attack and what it means for the future. Let's keep going.
Okay, so the October 7th attack, as we saw, really brought the brutal realities of this conflict to the forefront.
Yeah.
It raised a lot of difficult questions, too.
Yeah.
Especially about civilian casualties and the use of force.
You're right. You can't ignore the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah.
And your sources really go into the disproportionate impact on Palestinian civilians, especially in Gaza.
It's interesting how some of these sources go beyond just stating numbers.
Okay.
They provide detailed analyses of these specific military operations, like Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009,
right,
and Operation Protective Edge in 2014.
Right.
And they highlight not just the number of civilian casualties, but also the destruction of all this vital infrastructure.
Yeah.
Hospitals, schools, power plants.
I was really struck by the accounts of families huddled in UN shelters, just terrified as bombs are raining down around them.
Right.
It paints such a grim picture.
It really does. And it's in those specific cases that the debate about proportionality in international law becomes even more heated.
Okay.
Several of your sources, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, they really get into those legal arguments surrounding Israel's use of force in Gaza.
So what are some of the key arguments that are being made?
Well, on the one hand, Israel's arguing they're targeting Hamas, which everyone recognizes as a terrorist organization.
Right.
And they're saying they take precautions to minimize civilian harm.
Okay.
They point to Hamas's tactic of operating in densely populated areas and using human shields as factors that make it really hard to avoid civilian casualties.
But then you have human rights groups arguing that the scale of destruction and the types of weapons used indicate a blatant disregard for civilian life.
Exactly. And some of your sources specifically mention the use of white phosphorus munitions.
Right.
Which has been highly controversial.
Yeah.
While Israel says its use is within the bounds of international law, critics argue that these weapons are inherently indiscriminate.
Yeah.
Especially in urban environments.
Right. Yeah.
And they've caused horrific injuries to civilians.
It sounds like a legal and moral minefield.
It really is.
How can we even begin to assess the legitimacy of military actions in such a complex situation?
It's so difficult. There's no easy answer to that question. But what your sources make clear is that the debate about proportionality and civilian harm is central to understanding the international community's response to this conflict.
So you're talking about the boycotts, the UN resolutions condemning Israel, the protests we're seeing in Europe and around the world.
Exactly. This conflict has such a huge international dimension.
Yeah.
It's not just a regional issue.
Right.
It's a global one. Your sources highlight that boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, or BDS,
right,
which has really gained some traction in recent years.
Yeah.
And it's calling for a boycott of Israeli products and institutions over their treatment of Palestinians.
I've definitely seen those BDS campaigns picking up steam.
Yeah.
Even influencing consumer choices at supermarkets, on college campuses.
Yeah.
It's definitely a movement that's resonating with people.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really speaks to how far-reaching this conflict is.
Yeah.
The sources you provided also point out how social media has amplified Palestinian voices.
Right.
And helped mobilize international support.
Yeah, that seems like a key point. Social media has played a huge role in shifting public opinion, especially among younger generations.
Absolutely. Having those images and videos coming straight from Gaza, bypassing those traditional media filters, has had such a powerful impact on how people perceive the conflict.
But it's not just about online activism, right? You also mentioned the International Criminal Court, the ICC.
Right.
What potential role does it have in investigating alleged war crimes?
Yeah, the ICC is a really important part of this whole equation. They have the authority to investigate and prosecute individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide.
Okay.
However, as your sources point out,
yeah,
its involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is incredibly complex.
I can imagine.
And really politically charged.
Trying to apply international law to a conflict as deeply rooted and emotionally charged as this one must be like walking a tightrope.
It is. And there are all sorts of arguments about jurisdiction, concerns about the ICC's perceived bias against Israel, and the idea that these investigations could derail peace negotiations.
Right.
It's a very sensitive issue.
Yeah.
And what impact it's going to have on the trajectory of this conflict, well, that remains to be seen.
So we've got this super complex situation with international legal bodies trying to assert authority, grassroots movements gaining momentum, and a global community really grappling with how to respond. So where does all this leave us in terms of finding a path to peace?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one we'll explore as we continue this deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at the different peace proposals that have been suggested, the obstacles that are standing in their way, and those little glimmers of hope that persist, even in the face of these seemingly impossible challenges.
I'm ready to go deeper into all that. Let's do it.
All right, so we've talked about the history, the key players, the international response. But we haven't really touched on the human side of this story.
Yeah, what about the people living in the middle of all of this?
Exactly. How are Israelis and Palestinians coping with this seemingly never-ending conflict? Your sources actually do a really good job of highlighting the psychological impact. This conflict takes a toll on both sides. It's not just about physical security. It's about constantly living with fear, uncertainty, trauma.
Yeah, when I read those firsthand accounts, especially from the children who have grown up knowing nothing else, it's hard not to feel incredibly sad for them.
It really is. And some of your sources go into the long-term impact of that trauma on individuals and communities.
Okay.
So we're talking about increased rates of PTSD, anxiety, depression, and this sense of hopelessness that can be really hard to shake.
There was one source I read that I found really insightful.
Okay.
It was a study that looked at how being exposed to violence for long periods of time affects children's development. And it found that even just witnessing violence, not even directly experiencing it, could have a huge impact on their mental and emotional well-being.
That makes sense. The psychological scars from this conflict run really deep. And they affect multiple generations.
It's true.
Think about growing up in a place where rocket sirens go off all the time. Or having to go through these military checkpoints just to go to school.
It's heartbreaking to think about
It is.
All the lost potential, the dreams that get put on hold, the lives that are changed forever by this.
It is. But even with all the pain and suffering,
yeah,
your sources also show the incredible resilience of the human spirit. We see stories of people reaching out across the divide, communities working together to find some common ground.
Right.
These peace activists who just keep fighting for a better future.
I was really moved by the stories of those Israeli and Palestinian families who have lost loved ones to this conflict.
Right.
But instead of giving in to their grief, they've channeled it into activism.
Well,
working together to encourage dialogue and reconciliation.
Those stories are so powerful.
They are.
They remind us that even when things seem their darkest, hope is still there.
Right.
They show that peace isn't just some abstract idea. It's something that real people are working toward.
Yeah.
Every single day, no matter how hard it gets.
It really makes you realize that change is possible.
Yeah.
Even in a situation as complicated and as ingrained as this one.
It is.
It's about changing how people think and feel, one person at a time.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to that question of how to actually achieve lasting peace.
Okay. Your sources look at different possibilities. Everything from the two-state solution to some less traditional ideas.
Yeah.
Like a confederation or a regional framework.
Okay.
Maybe involving Jordan and Egypt.
The two-state solution, though, which we've been hearing about for decades, it seems like it's getting harder and harder to actually make it happen.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the question of what happens with Jerusalem.
The deep mistrust between both sides.
Yeah.
Those are some really big obstacles.
They are.
Some experts even think that a one-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians would live together with equal rights, is the only way forward.
But wouldn't that lead to a whole new set of challenges?
Probably.
How do you balance the desire for national self-determination with the need to create a society that's truly inclusive and fair?
That's a good question. And your sources don't shy away from exploring the possible problems with a one-state solution.
Okay.
You know, issues around identity, representation, and even the risk of reigniting the conflict.
It feels like we're stuck.
Kinda.
The two-state solution is slipping away, but the other options are so complex.
That's the reality of this conflict.
Yeah.
There are no simple answers.
Right.
No quick fixes.
No magic wand.
Nope. But your sources do remind us that pursuing peace is a process, not just a destination.
It's a journey.
Exactly.
Right.
It takes patience.
Right.
Persistence and a willingness to grapple with the hard questions and the uncomfortable truths.
So where do we go from here? What can we do as individuals to create a more peaceful future for Israelis and Palestinians?
That's what we all need to be asking ourselves.
It is.
It starts with education, really understanding all the nuances of this conflict, and challenging our own preconceived notions and biases.
It's about supporting those organizations that are working so hard to build understanding and encourage conversation. It's about making sure those voices for peace are heard and pushing back against those who spread hatred and division.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, it's about never giving up on that hope, that belief that a better future is out there, even when we don't know what the path looks like.
That's what makes these deep dives so important.
They do.
They give us the knowledge, the insight, a deeper understanding of the challenges we're facing.
Right.
And they remind us that even when things are complicated, even small actions can still make a difference.
Well, thank you for taking this journey with us. We hope this deep dive gave you a better understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that maybe it even inspired you to learn more about this important issue.
And remember, working towards peace is everyone's responsibility.
It is.
We all have a role to play.
We do.
Even if it seems small. In making the world a more just and equitable place.
Absolutely.